Hello, Professor Toybox here, along with Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey, and I'd like to welcome you to my new video game world, which I've called the Game Grid. This is a brand new toy box that we're going to build together over the next few months in my Toy Box Tutorials series. The story for this toy box is that Mickey's world has been transformed into a video game, and Mickey is trapped inside the game. In order to escape the video game and put his world back the way it was, he'll have to play a few different games that we're going to build. And that will unlock a terminal that he can then hack to break out of the system. Tomorrow I'm going to air a special video that will show you how to build what I have here so far in the toy box. So don't worry too much that I'm already in here and there's already things here. We'll do a special video tomorrow and I'll show you how to set the sky, place the terrain, and add all of the buildings and the trees and everything that you see here. But for today, we're going to begin with the toy box that you'll end up with after tomorrow's episode. And the first game that we're going to build is going to be a pinball game. Now, you can easily create a pinball game with a template that you can find in the templates drawer. You can purchase this from the toy store, and if you've unlocked all of the toys that it needs. But the game that this creates is very simplistic. It's just not that much fun. So I'm going to show you how to build your own custom pinball game, and I'm going to add a few special features to it. And one of the first toys that we're going to need is a super cannon that can launch the pinball. And you'll find this in the platforming toys drawer. And I'm just going to drop a couple of these right here in the middle of the pinball field. These aren't going to stay here, but they'll be something we can experiment with. And you might be wondering why I'm doing a tutorial on such a seemingly simple toy. But there's a lot more to this toy than you might think. You can actually do some pretty cool things with it. So I want to make sure I show these to you so that you know about them. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of them. You'll notice there's a logic menu for it. And you have some logic connections. You can connect this to a path like I've done recently in my Disney Infinity Sports series for the single player tennis. And there's a property. And under the property is the tilt position. And you have three settings. You can set this to 45 degrees. You can set this to 90 degrees, which will shoot it straight up. And you can put it at the default position, which is 0 degrees. So you can change it with a property. You can also change it with a logic connection, as I'll show you in a moment. And you can also change it by pushing this little button on the side. And that will cycle it through its different settings. And of course, when you get it up that high, you can't get to the button anymore. So now you kind of have to use the property to put it back where you want it. So we'll go ahead and put that at 0. All right, there are 2 trigger signals that this will broadcast that you can hook up other toys to. Tilt completed, and you'll notice when I change the property or whether I use the button on the side, it doesn't just jump to that setting, it kind of animates and moves toward that. And so when it reaches the setting that you want, it'll broadcast this tilt completed. You can use that to trigger other toys to do things. There's also the launched setting. So whenever a physics ball or a character or an enemy or something goes through this super cannon, it'll broadcast the launched signal, and you can use that to trigger other toys as well. Alright, there are also a lot of behaviors associated with this, and to demo these, I'm going to put down a couple of buttons over here, which we can then hook up to do some different things. So if we select this one and do a new logic connection when pressed, and we come over to our toy, you can turn it on and off, and we'll start with those first. So right now, by default, they're on. So when you place them in the toy box, these toys are on. So we'll use the left button to turn it on, we'll use the right button to turn it off. And I'll show you what that looks like. So if we turn it off, you can see the cannon part of it goes away. And now that toy will do nothing. You can walk up to it and nothing will happen. And it might not be a bad idea just to demo that real quick. So you walk up to it, it does nothing. And that can be handy to turn that on or off depending on what you're doing in your toy box. Maybe you only want it to come on in certain conditions. And then this button we hooked up to turn it on, and that restores the cannon. So there may be cases where that could be useful to you. Now we've already got a logic connection here, so let's edit it. So we'll come down to Super Cannon, I'll select that. So when the button is pressed, right now it's set to turn on. You can also have this tilt. And this will kind of cycle through the different settings. So if we push the button once, that moves it into the 45-degree position. Press it again, that moves it to 90. Press it again, we'll put it back at 0. And so you can use that to kind of tilt through those settings. That can be useful. And let's take these out of order. So you can do tilt to 0 degrees or 45 or 90. So this one cycles through them. You also have the option to put it directly to 90 degrees if you want, and put it at a specific angle. And that will just put it pointing straight up. So that can be useful. And let's go ahead and just make this easy. I'll use the property, put it back. I could have hooked up the logic for the behavior and made the button put it back to 0, but I think you get the idea. Another thing you can do is turn tilt constant on. And then we'll use this one to turn that off. So I'll edit this connection. Turn tilt constant off. And it's off by default. So if you turn that on using that behavior, you can see it constantly moves and it resets pretty quickly, and then it goes a little slower as it goes up. And so you could use that to build some kind of a launching shooting type of game where you have to time your button press or step on a trigger or something like that to launch the object at a specific angle. So this could be kind of useful if you wanted to build like an Angry Birds type of game or something. And then the other one, of course, turns that off, and that puts it back down at 0 in this case. It'll stop at actually the next position. So right now it's at 0. Next one is 45, so if we stop it, it stops there. So whatever the next setting is as it's moving along, that's where it'll stop. So you can't stop it at like 30 degrees or something like that. Now there's another behavior you could set on this. I'll edit this connection again. There's a rotate constant on. And I'll bet some of you didn't know this Super Cannon could do all of these cool things. We'll use this button to turn off the rotate behavior. And this works very similar, except it rotates. And again, you could build some interesting games with that. And likewise, when you push the stop button, it will stop at whatever the next 90-degree increment happens to be. So if I push it now, it stops pointing in that direction. If we stop it now, it stops pointing over that way. Oops. Trying to get it to point back in the other direction. I have a specific reason for wanting to do that. There you go. So now it's pointing back in its original direction. So yeah, you can have that thing spinning and tilting dynamically, and you can make that a really dynamic cannon, and that could be very, very useful. You can also hook up some controls to that to try to control that behavior using these logic connections. So using a series of buttons or the remote controller that we're going to be looking at in future episodes, you can control where that cannon points. So that can be really useful for certain games. There's one other behavior, and I'm really surprised actually that this isn't a property also, but we've looked at all of these except one. There's turbo on and turbo off. So let's use this first button to turn on turbo. We'll use this one to turn it off. And you might be wondering, what is turbo? Well, let me show you. And actually, before I do that, one of the things you'll notice with this cannon is that there's a little red marker out ahead of it. When you drop the cannon, it'll place that little red marker, and that's showing you where the target is going to go. And you'll notice right now both of these are the same. When I push this button, though, the one on the right is going to change. Watch the little red dot down there. You might be able to see it jump. And now if we go and look at that, first of all, you'll notice this cannon looks like it's sucking in a lot more air. And it's kind of got some animation there going, so it's been supercharged. And you'll notice the little target is way out here a lot further. So you can use this behavior to turn on turbo mode, which will launch your object further and faster than the standard super cannon. So this is like a super cannon. And that could be really fun to play with in races or in certain games that you want to build. If there's something on the track that you can pick up or drive over, which will turn on turbo mode, that could be really cool. So there's a lot of possibilities with this cannon than what you might first think. And of course the other trigger signal that we hooked up to, the other behavior, turns that back off. And if you notice, the little red dot moved back to its default position, and this is no longer in the highly animated turbo mode. Alright, so now that we know what the super cannon can do, let's place it into the launch chute for our pinball game. And the first thing we're going to notice as we pick this up and go to move it, it's not going to sit in here like we want. And let's go ahead and just disconnect these logic connections here, because we're done demoing the super cannon. So that's not going to sit in there quite like we want. However, we can move some of these terrain pieces out of the way. Yeah, it might be better just to move it down and stick it up in the air. Let's just do that. We'll put that one down. We'll put this one down. And this one. Here we go. We'll move up out of the way, and I think these other little blocks might be in the way if we do that. Yeah, so I have to do a little finagling here to get this to work. So ideally, you'd want to put the super cannons in before you put all of these blocks in. Let's put them at the same level. But since I hadn't covered that yet when I did the build, and I'm kind of doing the build video and the tutorial out of order because I wanted to keep the tutorial on Friday, then we got to move a few blocks. Alright, so that gets those out of the way. And then let's go ahead and move these also. And we'll put these up just a little ways here, just to make sure they're not going to block our cannons, because we're going to need more than one super cannon. And I think, I'm not sure if we need to move this one or not, but let's just go ahead and do that. Those other two blocks on the left, we won't need to. Alright, so now we can pick this up and drop it down without any trouble. And you'll notice the little red dot only gets us so far up the chute. So I'm actually going to use 3 of these. And we'll put this first one right here on top of that dot. And the next one right up here on top of that dot. And for that, we're going to have to move that other block here. Move that down as well. Maybe we will have to move that little block out of the way. And this will let us put these where we need them to be. And at this point we can drop all of these back down. And put all of our blocks back. I'm not going to put all of them back, but just the ones we need for the chute. And now you can see you can put them right there on side of the cannons, and that doesn't seem to bother it. There's a lot of things in Disney Infinity that are like that, where you can really place them where they need to go, but you have to do them in a certain order. If you don't do it in the right order, you won't be able to place these toys where you want them. Alright, so this would sit down in here, and then I'd put all those other little blocks back. One other thing, you'll notice we have this gap here. I think I mentioned that yesterday. So what we're going to need is another block to fill that space. But the trouble is I can't drop this in there. We'll go ahead and set that to be our retro video game level theme. And for right now, let's just drop this. Now let's leave it right there for the moment. So you could try to use a replayer to put that in place, and sometimes that will work. The most reliable way, though, that I've found to put this in place is with a path. And there are a few terrain blocks that you can connect to a path. That little block is one of them. So I've got this centered right underneath this block. Centered that way, centered that way. Drop it right down here on top of that. And we'll go ahead and delete that because it didn't put me in point mode. That time it did. We just need to drop 1 point. Alright, and then we'll edit the properties for the path. And most of these don't matter except the auto start objects when connected. We turn that off. And then just come up here to this object and connect this to a path. Not all terrain blocks have that new path connection option, but that one does. And that drops it in place. So there we have our chute. Now to test this, all we need is the falling object generator. And since we're going to need that for our pinball game anyway, we're going to drop this right here like that. If you notice the shadow where that's sitting on the terrain, we're going to put the top of this at the level of the cliff there. That's a little too high, so right there. So that way the ball will drop right down on that little ramp. It'll roll in there, and away it goes. Now it might need a little bit of help because there's no no little chimney there for it to fall through, so let's kind of build one. We come down to the terrain, or the basic blocks drawer. I'm going to use these little things. And we'll just stack up 3 of them like that. And we'll build ourselves a little thing. Now you can put that up there, but I'm going to do this. And just kind of make it look interesting. And that creates kind of a little chimney there for it. So I kind of like that. That'll funnel it down into that channel. And I might tweak that here before we go too much further in our video series, but for right now that will get the job done. And then we'll hook this button up. When pressed, we'll come up to our falling object generator. And the question is what ball would you use for a pinball? Because there isn't really a good one here to use. The tennis ball is too bouncy. That's going to cause issues. Obviously a hockey puck is flat. Football's not a good shape either. Some of these are kind of too big. I found the bowling ball though works best. So we'll use the bowling ball as our pinball. And this should launch the ball into the playing field. So that drops in. There goes the ball. And now it's in the field. And you'll notice it's not really moving like you would expect a ball to do. And we're going to address that in a future episode here too. Because the machine is flat. Most pinballs are tilted. Most pinball machines are tilted so that the ball will roll. And gravity does the rest. But we have to do something a little bit different here. And we're going to use a toy to do that in a future episode. But now we have the launch chute for our pinball machine. Next time we'll examine the pinball flippers and bumpers and start setting up the playing field. Until then, I want to thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed my video today. Don't forget to come back tomorrow for the special build video for this toy box, or better yet, subscribe to my channel by clicking my photo in the lower right corner of this video, and then you won't miss it. That's all for me today. See you tomorrow.